Stop acting like you're important. My mother laughed at me during a family dinner. We barely notice when you're around, my brother smirked. So I stood up, raised my glass, and said, "This toast will only take 3 sentences." By the second sentence, their faces were white as ghosts, and their entire world was collapsing. Before we get to that fateful toast, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that family dinner. The family dinner was a celebration of my brother, Carter. Everything, it seemed, was a celebration of my brother, Carter. We were at a ridiculously expensive restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths so stiff they could stand up on their own, and the entire evening was a performance. Carter, the charismatic, handsome, and reckless CEO of our late father's company, was holding court. He was telling a loud, embellished story about a recent business deal, and my mother, Diana, was hanging on his every word, her face a mask of pure, maternal adoration. I was the third person at the table, a quiet, forgotten ghost. To my family, I was Sloane, the artistic one, the quiet, analytical daughter who had inherited none of her father's business sense and none of her brother's charm. I was a member of the company's board, yes, but they saw my position as a sentimental gesture from my late father, a token seat to keep the little girl happy. They had no idea that my father, a brilliant and deeply cautious man, had seen the truth. He had seen his son's recklessness, his wife's frivolous spending, and on his deathbed, he had made a final, secret, and brilliant move to protect his life's work. He had left the public-facing role of CEO to his flashy son, but the silent, controlling 51% majority share of the entire holding company he had left to me. "He is the face of the company," my father had whispered to me in his final days, his voice a papery rasp. "But you, my quiet, careful Sloane, you must be the brakes. You must protect this family from itself." And for 5 years, I had honored his wish. I had lived a quiet, modest life. I had attended the board meetings, a silent figure in the corner, and I had used my anonymous controlling vote to quietly veto Carter's most insane and reckless expansion plans. I had been the secret, invisible hand that had kept the company from imploding, all while my brother took the credit for the profits and my mother mocked my lack of ambition. Tonight, the conversation turned to Carter's newest, grandest plan, a high-risk merger with a volatile tech company. It was a gamble, a flashy move that could double the company's worth or bankrupt it entirely. I had run the numbers. I knew the risks. It was financial suicide. I saw my opening, a small pause in my brother's monologue, and I took it. "Carter," I began, my voice quiet but clear, "have you run the stress tests on that projection? The market is incredibly volatile right now. The debt-to-asset ratio—" I was cut off by my mother's high, tinkling, and utterly dismissive laugh. She patted my hand as if I were a small child who had just tried to join a grown-up conversation. "Oh, Sloane, darling," she said, her voice dripping with sweet, condescending poison. "Stop acting like you're important. Leave the business talk to your brother. He knows what he's doing." My brother, Carter, just smirked, a look of pure, arrogant amusement on his face. He leaned back in his chair and joined the show. "It's cute that you're trying to keep up, little sister, but honestly, we barely even notice when you're around in these meetings." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across my cheeks. I looked at them, at their smiling, confident, and utterly clueless faces. And in that moment, I realized my father's plan had failed. My role as the brakes wasn't protecting the company. It was just enabling them. My silence was not a shield. It was a permission slip for their cruelty, for their arrogance, for their incompetence. My father had asked me to protect them from themselves, but he had never told me what to do if they became completely and totally insufferable. I watched them laugh at my expense, so confident in their own brilliance, so blind to the truth of the power I held. I thought of my father's final words, protect this family from itself. But what if the only way to protect the legacy he had built was to save it from the very people he had left in charge? I felt a new, cold, and unfamiliar resolve settle in my heart. I had been the brakes for 5 years, but I realized in that moment that some cars are simply meant to be crashed, and my only job now was to take my hands off the wheel and let it happen. I endured the rest of that dinner with a strange, new, and almost exhilarating sense of calm. The insults from my mother, Diana, and my brother, Carter, which had stung so sharply just moments before, now seemed like the buzzing of distant, insignificant flies. They continued to talk, to laugh, to perform their roles as the brilliant, successful heads of the family, completely and totally oblivious to the profound tectonic shift that had just occurred in the quiet, underestimated woman sitting at their table. They thought they had silenced me. They had, in fact, just armed me. The drive home to my own apartment was a quiet, focused journey. The glittering lights of the city, which usually seemed so vast and intimidating, now looked like a kingdom of possibilities. My father's voice echoed in my head, his last desperate plea: "You must be the brake, Sloan. Protect this family from itself." For 5 years, I had interpreted his words as a command to be a passive, silent guardian, a secret safety net to catch my brother's endless, arrogant mistakes. I had thought my duty was to save my brother from his failures. But as I sat there, replaying my mother's dismissive laugh and my brother's cruel smirk, I finally understood the true and far more ruthless meaning of my father's final wish. My job wasn't to protect my brother from failure. It was to protect my father's legacy from him. And the only way to do that was to take it all away. I spent that night in my father's old study, a room I had recreated in my own apartment, filled with his books, his old leather armchair, the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. It was my sanctuary. I poured myself a small glass of his favorite whiskey, and I went to the safe hidden behind a false panel of books. Inside was the document, the true will, the corporate charter for the Vance Holding Company. I read the clause he had shown me, the one he had called his "in case of emergency, brick glass" provision. It was a masterpiece of legal foresight. It gave me, as the silent 51% majority shareholder, the unilateral and unquestionable right to accept a standing buyout offer from a small, pre-approved list of stable competitors if, in my sole judgment, the company was facing an existential threat from gross internal mismanagement. My brother's reckless, ego-driven plan to merge with a volatile tech company was not just a threat. It was a signed and sealed invitation to that very clause. The next morning, I did not wake up as Sloan, the quiet, artistic school teacher my family thought I was. I woke up as my father's daughter. I put on my best, most severe, and most professional black suit. I did my hair not in its usual soft style, but pulled back in a tight, no-nonsense bun. I was no longer the brakes. I was the CEO. At precisely 9 a.m., I made a single phone call. "Mr. Hawthorne's office?" A polite, professional voice on the other end answered. "This is Sloan Vance," I said, my own voice a calm, steady instrument that I barely recognized. "I am the majority shareholder of the Vance Holding Company. Please inform Mr. Hawthorne that his long-standing offer to acquire our assets is being formally accepted. I am invoking the emergency mismanagement clause of our corporate charter." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I see, Miss Vance," the assistant finally stammered. "Mr. Hawthorne is in a meeting, but You will interrupt him," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "And you will tell him to have his legal team draw up the final papers. I will be at his office at noon to sign them." I hung up the phone. It was done. In a single 3-minute phone call, I had set in motion the sale and the end of my family's 70-year-old legacy. I felt no sadness, no regret, only a profound and deeply satisfying sense of a promise finally being kept. I spent the next few hours watering my plants, a strange domestic calm descending over me. I was a woman who had just detonated a nuclear bomb and was now quietly dusting her bookshelves. At 11:30, as I was gathering my things to leave for the lawyer's office, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from my mother, full of her usual cheerful and completely oblivious exclamation points. "Darling," it read, "Carter is hosting a small, impromptu, celebratory dinner tonight at the club to officially announce the new merger to the board. You simply must come. 7 p.m. It's so important to show a united family front." I looked at her message, at her casual, arrogant assumption that my role was to be a silent, smiling prop at her son's coronation. A slow, cold, and deeply dangerous smile spread across my face. A celebratory dinner. It was perfect. It was a stage, gift-wrapped and delivered to me by the very people I was about to destroy. I texted her back, "Of course, Mother. I wouldn't miss it for the world." I had thought my revenge would be a quiet, private affair, a simple signing of papers. But my mother had just handed me a far, far better opportunity. She had just handed me an audience. They were about to toast to a glorious future that, unbeknownst to them, I had already sold to the highest bidder. And I decided in that moment that I simply had to attend their party. After all, it's not every day you get to watch a king celebrate his coronation hours after he has already been quietly, completely, and irrevocably dethroned. The signing of the papers at Hawthorne Industries was a quiet, anticlimactic, and profoundly violent act. I sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room 40 floors above the city, the powerful and notoriously ruthless CEO, Mr. Hawthorne, sitting opposite me. His lawyers, a team of sharks in sharp suits, looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional curiosity. They thought I was a jilted family member, a woman scorned, making an emotional decision. They had no idea this was the coldest, most logical, and most necessary decision of my entire life. "Are you certain about this, Ms. Vance?" Mr. Hawthorne had asked me, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Once you sign this, there is no going back. Your family's company will cease to exist." I looked at him, my hand steady, my resolve absolute. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen, and with a single, fluid stroke of my own name, I signed away my family's 70-year-old legacy. I had honored my father's truest wish. I had saved his company. I had just saved it from his own son. That evening, I walked into the private dining room of the Pinnacle Club, the restaurant my family used for all their most important celebrations. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and a smug, self-congratulatory triumph. The entire board of directors of the Vance Holding Company was there, a collection of old, powerful men who had enabled my brother's reckless behavior for years. And at the head of the table, basking in the glow of their adoration, were my mother, Diana, and my brother, Carter. I was the last to arrive. I had dressed for the occasion, not in a celebratory dress, but in the same simple, severe, and powerful black suit I had worn to sign the papers that afternoon. It was a suit of armor. "Sloan, darling, you made it," my mother trilled, her voice a little too loud. Come, sit. We were just about to toast your brilliant brother's newest and greatest success." I took my seat, a quiet, unassuming ghost at their feast of fools. For the next hour, I listened. I listened as my brother, Carter, held court, his voice booming with a confidence that bordered on megalomania. He spoke of the brilliant new merger he had orchestrated, of the glorious future of the company, of the market dominance that was, now, he assured them, inevitable. The board members, all of them men who should have known better, just nodded and smiled, caught up in the cult of his charisma. I listened as my mother praised him, her fawning words a testament to her own willful blindness. "My son," she had said, her hand on his arm, "is a visionary, just like his father, but bolder." The irony of it all was a quiet, secret, and deeply satisfying joy in my own heart. They were toasting a future that no longer existed. They were celebrating a king who was already a corpse. Finally, after the main course was cleared, the formal toasts began. The company chairman, a man I had known my entire life, stood and gave a long, rambling speech in praise of Carter's genius. And then Carter himself stood up. He raised his glass, his eyes sweeping the room, a conquering hero. He thanked the board, he thanked his mother, and then his eyes, full of a familiar, pitying amusement, landed on me. And I would, of course, like to thank my little sister Sloane for her quiet support from the sidelines. The men around the table chuckled politely. It just goes to show that you don't need a head for business to be a part of a successful family. The insult, so public, so dismissive, so perfectly encapsulating their view of me, was the final, beautiful gift he could have ever given me. It was my cue. As he sat down to a round of enthusiastic applause, I picked up my own untouched champagne flute, and I stood up. A slow, confused silence fell over the table. All eyes turned to me. They were expecting a quiet, tearful, and sentimental speech from the artistic sister. They were expecting a few mumbled words of praise for her brilliant brother. "Thank you, Carter," I said. My voice quiet, but it cut through the room with a new, strange, and chilling authority. "I would like to propose a toast as well." I looked around at their bored, expectant, and utterly clueless faces. "And I promise," I said, a slow, cold smile on my face, "this will only take 3 sentences." My brother looked at me with that familiar, pitying smirk, so sure of his own power, so certain of his victory. He thought he was the king of the world. He had no idea he was just a dead man walking, and that I, his quiet, unimportant little sister, was about to read his eulogy. I stood up, and a wave of irritated silence fell over the table. My brother, Carter, looked at me with a bored, indulgent expression, as if his pet cat had just decided to perform a trick. My mother, Diana, gave me a small, tight warning smile, a silent command not to embarrass them with a long, sentimental speech. They, and the entire board of powerful, gray-haired men sitting around the table, were expecting a few mumbled, tearful words of praise for the great CEO, Carter. I picked up my champagne flute, the cool, delicate glass, a steady, solid presence in my hand. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each and every one of them, my expression a calm, unreadable mask. "I would like to propose a toast," I began, my voice quiet, but it cut through the room with a new, strange, and chilling authority. "And I promise," I said, a slow, cold smile on my face as I looked at my impatient mother, "this will only take 3 sentences." I raised my glass. "First," I said, my voice clear and steady, "I'd like to propose a toast to my mother and my brother, who are absolutely and completely right when they say that my presence in this company is, for the most part, barely noticed." A few of the board members chuckled politely. My brother, Carter, let out a short, smug, and condescending laugh, giving a small nod as if to say, "Finally, she understands her place." My mother just beamed, a look of triumphant pride on her face. This was perfect. The quiet, simple daughter was finally acknowledging her own irrelevance.
I let their smug, self-satisfied amusement hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. I then took a small, deliberate sip of my champagne before continuing. "I am sure then," I said, my voice now dropping a little lower, each word a carefully placed, perfectly weighted stone, "that they also barely noticed when I attended a board meeting yesterday afternoon and in my capacity as the silent 51% majority shareholder of this family's holding company, approved the complete and total sale of all our assets to Hawthorne Industries, effective this morning." The silence that followed was not a silence, it was a physical void. It was the sound of all the air being sucked out of the room at once. It was the sound of a world ending. I watched with a strange, detached calm as the faces around the table transformed. The polite, bored smiles on the faces of the board members vanished, replaced with looks of pure, slack-jawed, and utter shock. My mother's triumphant, beaming expression did not just fade, it seemed to shatter, her face crumbling into a mask of pure, white, uncomprehending horror. And my brother, my brilliant, charismatic CEO brother, the color drained from his face as if a plug had been pulled at the base of his neck. His mouth opened and closed, a series of small, strangled, fish-like gasps escaping his lips. The words majority shareholder and sale of all assets were ricocheting around the inside of his skull, demolishing the entire beautiful and arrogant edifice of his life. They were all frozen, statues of their own ruin, trapped in the wreckage of a reality that had, in the space of a single sentence, ceased to exist. And while they were still suspended in that beautiful, terrible silence, I delivered the final, merciful blow.
"And, finally," I said, my voice the only sound in the dead silent room as I raised my glass one last time to my two shell-shocked relatives, "this will be my final announcement as the person who has been secretly and silently funding your extravagant and deeply dysfunctional lives for the past 5 years." I smiled, a real, genuine, and deeply satisfied smile. Cheers. The room erupted into chaos. The board members were all shouting at once, their voices a confused, furious roar. "Sold the company? What is she talking about, Carter? Is this a joke?" My brother just stared at me, his eyes full of a new, dawning, and utterly terrified hatred. "She's lying." He finally managed to choke out, his voice a pathetic squeak. "She's delusional. She doesn't have that kind of power. Tell them, Mother." But my mother was beyond speaking. She was just staring at me, a single silent tear tracing a path through her perfect, expensive makeup. I did not engage in the shouting. My part in this play was over. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single, neatly folded document. It was a notarized copy of the signed and now executed sales agreement with Hawthorne Industries. I slid it down the long, polished table to the company's stunned chairman. "I believe you will find everything is in order," I said quietly. I then placed my napkin on the table, turned my back on the chaos, on my ruined brother, on my weeping mother, and on the entire burning wreckage of my old life. I had walked into this dinner a quiet, invisible, and unimportant girl. I was walking out a very, very wealthy woman. My father had asked me to be the brakes, but I had come to realize that he had also, in his infinite wisdom, given me the power to be the ignition, and I had just set fire to their entire world to build my own from the ashes. I walked out of the hushed private dining room and did not look back. I moved through the main restaurant, a calm, solitary figure in a black suit, and the normal, cheerful chatter of the other patrons seemed to be coming from another planet. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt for the first time in my entire adult life a profound and beautiful sense of quiet. The weight of my father's secret, the burden of my family's expectations, the constant grinding pressure of my own silent sacrifice, it was all gone,
left behind in that room with the wreckage of their shattered egos. As I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air, my phone began to buzz in my purse. It was my mother. I watched her name flash on the screen, a frantic, desperate summons. I declined the call. A moment later, a text message from my brother Carter appeared. "You have no idea what you've just done. Call me now." I looked at his angry, panicked words, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. "Oh, I think I do," I whispered to myself. And then, with a feeling of pure, unadulterated liberation, I blocked both of their numbers. The days that followed were a quiet, legal storm. My family, as expected, tried to fight back. They hired a team of expensive lawyers. They tried to contest my father's will, to claim I had acted in bad faith, that I had misinterpreted the mismanagement clause. But my father had been a brilliant and meticulous man. His legal directives were an ironclad fortress. Their challenges were pathetic, desperate, and ultimately fruitless. The sale of Vance Holdings to Hawthorne Industries was final. The story, of course, became a legend in the city's business circles. The tale of the quiet, overlooked daughter who had, in a single, 3-sentence toast, completely and legally dismantled her arrogant brother's empire.
My brother, Carter, once the celebrated golden boy, was now a cautionary tale, a man whose hubris had cost him everything. My mother, Diana, whose entire identity was built on her social standing as the wife and mother of powerful men, was now just a woman with a disgraced son and a daughter who refused to speak to her. Their world had not just collapsed, it had been erased. I attended one last formal meeting with them at the lawyer's office to sign the final disbursement papers. They were different people. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated bitterness. They looked at me with the eyes of strangers, with the raw, wounded hatred of the vanquished. They tried to speak to me, to either apologize or to accuse, I'm not sure which. I did not give them the chance. I signed my papers in a cool, professional silence, gave a polite nod to the lawyers, and I walked out of their lives forever. I did not retire. I did not buy a yacht or a mansion. I took my father's true legacy, his belief in quiet, intelligent, and underestimated people, and I built something new. I started my own venture capital firm. A different kind of firm. We didn't invest in the loud, charismatic Carters of the world. We invested in the Sloans, the quiet, brilliant, and overlooked founders, the introverts, the academics, the women, the minorities, the people with world-changing ideas who were consistently ignored by the old boys club of the financial world. It's been a year now. I am sitting in my new office. It is not the grand, mahogany-paneled office of my father. It is a bright, airy, and modern space, filled with light and the excited collaborative buzz of a dozen brilliant minds. I am at the head of a long conference table, but I am not listening to the self-aggrandizing monologue of a single CEO. I am listening to a young, nervous, and utterly brilliant female engineer pitch a revolutionary new idea for renewable energy. I look at her passion, at her quiet, unshakable confidence in her own work, and I see a reflection of a part of myself I had kept hidden for far too long. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, trying to convince me my voice didn't matter. But in their final, arrogant act of dismissal, they had not silenced me. They had unleashed me. The money, I now understand, was never the real prize. The real prize was my own voice. My father hadn't just left me a controlling share in a company, he had left me a key that had finally, blessedly, unlocked me from the prison of their expectations. I am no longer the brakes on someone else's runaway train. I am the engine of my own. I smile at the young, brilliant woman across the table. I believe in you, I tell her. I believe in your work. Let's build it together. And as I see the look of pure,
unadulterated and life-changing hope in her eyes, I feel a sense of joy so profound it's a physical thing. This is my legacy. This is my victory. This is my final and most beautiful toast. An absolutely powerful story of a quiet woman finding her voice and changing the game. What do you think of Sloane's 3-sentence toast? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were cheering for Sloane's ultimate victory, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible stories of satisfying karma. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.